Pass.
Guys, I apologize everybody in advance. My office doesn't believe in Zoom, and so I might be cutting in and out with video at least at the worst. My audio should continue.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. My name is Scott Loggins with the Commission on Post. I yield to you, Mr. Barron. We are live and you're free to start your meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Loggins, and good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to our advisory committee meeting. Once again, we're obviously on Zoom, away from one another. The opportunity to see everyone is only digitally. I appreciate everyone for being on time and their patience in handling this meeting together. Before we get going, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we've been very fortunate to have no officers in California that lost their lives in the line of duty. However, I'd like everyone to please join me for a moment of silence in honoring the officers who have lost their lives since the last meeting we had. Thank you for that. If we can please have a roll call of the committee members, please.
Banning,
Here.
Barron,
Here.
Bernard,
Here.
DeBasilio,
Here.
Honda,
Here.
Oborn,
Here.
Okashima,
Here.
Salazar,
Here.
Sandoval, Sandoval. I think you're muted.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Here.
Thank you. Schmidt,
Here.
Waltz,
Here.
Webb,
Here.
Young.
I'm here.
You.
Chair, I think you're muted, but now's the time to.
Sorry about that. Yes. Mr. Loggins, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As I mentioned, my name is Scott Loggins. I'm one of the Assistant Executive Directors for the Commission on Post. With us is my counterpart, Assistant Executive Director Maria Sandoval, as well as our Executive Director, Mr. Manny Alvarez. And I yield back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate, again, all the hard work everyone's done. I know we're all busy, but I hope everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes from last meeting. If I could please have you guys digitally take a moment to give an approval on these, please. If I can have a motion.
Motion Bernard to approve.
Second, Salazar.
Anyone abstain? Any nays?
This is PJ Webb. I'll abstain. I was not able to attend the last meeting.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Honda, I was also absent from the last meeting.
Thank you, sir. Any nays?
Sandoval also abstaining. I was not at the last meeting.
Thank you, sir. Anyone? With that, motion passes. Thank you. Any announcements from the committee? Actually, we should take a vote, correct? Am I muted again? Am I not showing?
I don't think your motion came through audibly. If you could do so, sir.
Okay. Motion passes. Can we hear that?
I believe it'd be preferable if you could actually call for a verbal yay or nay vote, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, sir.
Produce it on the record. So all in favor?
Maybe please call a vote, please.
Banning,
Aye.
Barron,
Yes, aye.
Bernard,
Aye.
DiBasilio,
Yes.
Honda,
Aye.
Oborn,
Yes.
Okashima,
Yes.
Salazar,
Yes.
Sandoval,
Yes.
Schmidt,
Yes.
Waltz,
Yes.
Webb,
This is on the minutes. I didn't hear the motion.
Yes.
Young.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
I believe we had a majority, if I can verify with Carrie, did we get a majority votes? Mr. Chair, we had a majority of members voting to approve the minutes.
Excellent, sir. Thank you. Motion passes at that point. I appreciate that. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. Any announcements from the committee? Any announcements? Okay, hearing none, then we can go ahead and review the commission's meeting agenda, please.
Very well, thank you very much. Well, Mr. Chair, before I do so, if we run into future audible challenges with your connectivity, do I have your authority to yield to Mr. Randy Waltz to fill in your absence if we're unable to hear you?
Yes, please, and I apologize in advance again for this. I'm at the office and we don't use Zoom. They don't let us. We're doing our best to use duct tape and toothpicks to make it work.
Very well. Good afternoon, members of the advisory committee. Before you, you have the agenda for tomorrow's commission meeting. Of the numerous items, your committee requested to hear presentations on 10 of the items, some of which are consent, some are voting matters. The first one I'm going to present, I'm going to introduce my counterpart, Assistant Executive Director Maria Sandoval. She's going to give a report on decertification of peace officers.
Thank you, Scott. During the roundtable commission meeting held on August 26, 2020, commissioners requested post staff research the commission's authority to decertify or render the basic certificate null and void. This action taken against an individual would be based upon actions or inactions during the scope of duties as a peace officer. The Penal Code has two very specific sections relating to the commission's ability to decertify police officers. Those are both entered in on January 1st, 2004. Penal Code Section 13503H and I state the following: the commission shall not have the authority to adopt or carry out regulation that authorizes the withdrawal or revocation of the certificate previously issued to a peace officer pursuant to this chapter. I states, except as specifically provided by law, the commission shall not have the authority to cancel a certificate previously issued to a peace officer pursuant to this chapter. Penal Code Section 13506 states, the commission may adopt those regulations that are necessary to carry out the purpose of this chapter. The commission shall not have the authority to adopt or carry out regulation that authorizes a withdrawal or revocation of a certificate previously issued to a peace officer pursuant to this chapter. Except as specifically provided by law, the commission shall not have the authority to adopt regulations providing for the cancellation of a certificate. The analyses are very clear. Based upon these two penal code sections, the commission has no authority to suspend or revoke individual basic certificates. Any questions?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may, also, if I can add on, thank you for giving me the opportunity. So we had a discussion internally about this because the commission basically asked, well, what authorities do we have absent legislation to enforce certain standards or to take action against officers or individuals that are non-compliant or engaged in something that they shouldn't be in. And really, there, as Maria just outlined, there really is no authority for us to take individual, or the commission to take individual action against individual persons. We met with DOJ, we had consultation with them as to what the commission could and couldn't do. And really, the only thing that can be done is to take action against agencies individually for non-compliance or for not complying with post standards. The problem with that, I mean, we can use training as a simple example. If you're non-compliant with training, that there will probably be some very disparate treatment amongst agencies, probably affecting the small agencies more so than the bigger agencies, right? If you have an agency with 10 or 20 or 30 peace officers and 5 of them are non-compliant with training standards, it's easier to take action against a small agency than a larger agency. That's just the reality of it. So I think the short of it is, and what we intend to tell the commission tomorrow is, we really have no authority whatsoever other than kicking agencies out of post. That's the position that we're in, and that, I think Maria outlined it perfectly with the penal code. It is very black and white. Thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarez. Any questions?
Yeah, I got a question. This is Honda. Hey, Manny, so the worst case scenario, so we end up kicking a agency out of post. What does that mean for the agency? I mean, they can still continue to function, right?
Sure, they could continue to be a law enforcement agency in California. Obviously, there are certain benefits to being part of post. One, there's audits and compliance checks that we do of both personnel files, of all personnel files, 100% personnel files when there's hiring. That's done for both dispatchers and public safety dispatchers and peace officers. There's obviously training requirements that they have to, that agencies have to adhere to. Supervisory course is a perfect example. If you're a sergeant, you have to go through the sergeant's course or the supervisory course. We pay for that, so the agencies don't have to pay for that. There's a lot of non-mandated training that that they can partake in, essentially gratis, where they don't have to pay for it. So yeah, in theory, an agency could leave post, not be required to have post review their hiring file, not have a requirement to go to the supervisory course, and then not being able to get any kind of reimbursement and would have to pay for all their training. So in theory, they could. And there's a small number of agencies in California, primarily really small K through 12 police departments that do not participate in the post program. Most do, but they're perfectly permitted to operate outside of post. It is a voluntary program.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for that presentation.
Very well, Mr. Chair. I just, my question to you, because this was a specific ask of the commission, does the committee want to entertain any recommendations or guidance for the commission or opinion thereof?
Committee, any comments? Anything you would like to take to the commission tomorrow?
So this is Honda again. Is there anything we can take to the committee? If there's nothing post can do, there's really nothing to talk about, unless I'm missing something.
I think the commission. Go ahead. I apologize.
This is Waltz. I agree. If absent legislation that makes it possible to do something like this, like some other states have as a licensing type of situation, I don't think that we can do anything. Our hands are somewhat tied, even though there has been a lot of interest and concern in this from the public. So I think if legislation comes down, that's our time to start getting ready for that and be able to act on it.
Well, thank you very much.
I may, Mr. Chair, too, I would say I agree with the staff's recommendation that absent some piece of legislation that requires this, there's nothing Post can really do with it. And I think on behalf of Cal Chiefs, obviously the bill that came through this last legislative session that dealt with decertification did not move forward. I assume we'll see something similar come up in the next legislative session. It's obviously a hot topic item, but I think that would be something for the major associations and to work with the legislators that come up to hopefully have some influence on what that may look like. So.
Very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that.
Next, I'd like to invite Bureau Chief Phil Caparelli from the Strategic Communications Bureau to the podium. He's going to provide a report that was requested by one of our commissioners. It's a report on strategic communications strategy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the advisory committee. This is an informational report on a marketing or branding strategy for Post. The issue is what strategies can be employed to brand or market Post. By way of background, at the February commission meeting, Commissioner Ramirez requested that Post research a marketing or branding strategy for Post. The presentation was tabled at the June commission meeting due to COVID-19. I'd like to make 2 points that are based upon the Post strategic plan and recommendations from the Mission Consulting Organizational Analysis Report of January 23rd, 2018. The first point made was to implement strategic communications and marketing efforts to promote wider understanding of Post roles and services, improve service, promote compliance, and build the Post brand. Secondly, to personalize the brand of Post, which is often identified solely as a compliance and regulatory agency without much insight into all that Post does and the people who make up the organization. So by virtue of those recommendations, Post has created a strategic communications unit within the Strategic Communications and Research Bureau. By virtue of that, all outward communications, for example, bulletins, publications, monthly reports, are funneled through that unit to ensure that there's consistent style, branding, and easily recognizable content from Post. Also pursuant to Senate Bill 978, expanded course outlines and videos for Post-approved courses have been put onto public web pages. Specifically, there are currently 4,379 expanded course outlines available to the public and 96 training videos also available on the public-facing website. Some of the suggestions for consideration by the commission are to, number one, create podcasts which would highlight different services and publications offered by Post to participating agencies, and also highlight changes, achievements, and current events impacting law enforcement. Secondly, is to use the Did You Know video series to further explain Post roles and responsibilities. Third, to increase the frequency of social media posts that highlight Post's achievements. For example, videos, publications, and workshops. And lastly, to create a Post Instagram account. This concludes my formal presentation, and I'm available for any questions or comments by the advisory committee.
If I may, I have one question. Having had all these ECOs available online, have we been able to track and see how many hits we're getting on those by any chance?
I don't know the answer to that, sir, but I can check with our Computer Services Bureau and get an answer for that.
Right, thank you. Committee, any questions?
I just have a comment, Randy Waltz. Yeah, I think this is something that's really important for Post as a whole, because when I was a street deputy, my vision of Post was this huge rectangular multi-story building that had thousands of people that made certificates. So when I got on this committee, I learned it was a lot more than that with a lot fewer people. So I think that anything we can do to push out some of the tasks that are going on inside a Post, I think is going to be beneficial to us and also as a profession to see what is going on.
Thank you, Under Sheriff Waltz. One of the things that predicated this is we realized that there's a lot of good work that's done by not only Post, but the stakeholders that do all Post work. There's often misinformation in the media as to what exactly is provided for law enforcement officers, but you're right on the money. There's a wealth of information that not by design has been comparatively difficult for people to find out. And this is, we're just in the infancy of the strategic communications process, so we can figure out a way to better broadcast the work that Post is doing, but more importantly, to broadcast information and resources that are available to the law enforcement community.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, if I may interject again.
Please, sir.
So Phil touched on one of the topics that we've had some discussion about, and that was podcasts. And obviously we could do internal podcasts for us and for the public relatively easy. We also talked about doing podcasts with commissioners, doing the podcast and kind of an interview and question session for each commissioner that the peace officers, dispatchers, and the general public can listen to. We've also thrown out the idea of town halls. Obviously we have a commission meeting in Pasadena in February. We can hold a town hall right before that with one or two commissioners or a series of commissioners. But then again, it takes a flavor of public comment period during a commission meeting when people come up and speak. But we have that ability to do town halls. We've also talked about, we have the funding where we can do individual town halls. So if a commission member teamed with a Post staff member to answer technical questions and hear from the committee, that we can do that to a certain extent around the state. If that's an idea that they would like to pursue. And then a previous Post executive director talked about the possibility of creating a community committee to hear from the community, much like we hear from advisory during commission meetings. So those are 3 or 4 different options that we've kind of been toying around with outside of the general pushing out of information through Twitter and social media and bulletins and such. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarez. Any other comments or questions from the committee?
Very well. Thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the next report, I'm going to invite Staff Services Manager Melanie Singley up to give us a report on peace officer background investigations. And as you approach the computer, Melanie, if I could ask you to look in the lower left corner of the screen and turn on the camera so that we may see you as you present.
Lower left corner.
Perfect.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. At the August commission meeting, the commission had asked for Post to present information on backgrounds and what we can do to improve the process. Part of that was based on some legislation that was going through, specifically AB 1299 regarding that was going to have Post finish investigations of officers who are leaving one department under investigation, leaving it in lieu of termination, and then moving on to other departments, but the other departments not realizing there may be issues related to the officer's former conduct. Our background investigation process is one that is comprehensive. It involves a variety of factors, including the individual completing a personal history statement, which is an extensive 28-page document that goes into every detail of an officer's or the individual's background. It includes information on references, past employment and experience, military, vehicle, legal history, et cetera. Post does require, I think some of the issues that were discussed at the August meeting related to employment of an officer and misconduct that may not be discovered by the agency that is looking to hire the officer. Post requires as part of the background process that the agencies review current and past employers from the last 10 years at a minimum. So that would include if they're currently employed by a law enforcement agency or had prior been employed by a law enforcement agency. As part of that process, they would look at various aspects of employment. Some of the most recent legislation that was passed in 2019 that went into effect requires agencies to identify and to track and to investigate misconduct of peace officers and to create a personnel file or other file that would contain that information. It also requires the peace officer who is seeking employment with another agency to allow the other agency to review that information. And that was Penal Code Section 832.12 that was added in January of 2019. As far as all other information, we also Post requires in our regulation that there's a sharing of background information. So if an agency is currently backgrounding a potential candidate, we do require that they share that information with another agency that's doing the same process. That information does have to be independently verified by the hiring agency, as well as taking into account any other legal issues that might come up. The background also involves that they take a look at what we call the background investigation dimensions. So there are various positive behaviors. So not only does the background have to require that the individual is of good moral character, they also have to be absent from any past behaviors that would be indicative of unsuitability for peace officer employment. So we have a set of what we call background investigation factors that have to be, or background investigation dimensions that have to be assessed during the background process. That includes positive behaviors as well as a list of indicators that would identify negative past behaviors. There were some examples given in the agenda items, such as if there are issues with bias towards individuals, misconduct during employment in a position of public safety, et cetera. So those are required in our background process. So part of this was, are there ways that we can improve how the background process is conducted? We do have an extensive process. We have, as I mentioned, the personal history statement that needs to be filled out. There are a variety of areas that need to be looked into as far as our personal legal history. And then we also require that that background investigators contact references, et cetera, including, as mentioned, past employers. We also require that if an individual has applied at other departments, they have to indicate on the personal history statement form how far they got in the process, the status, that sort of thing. And again, departments would need to share that information as far as if they're undergoing a background investigation with another agency to be able to share that information with the employing agency. Some of the suggestions we have for possibly improving the process would be requiring a background investigation training that currently is not required. Thus, you have perhaps some background investigators who are not familiar with post requirements, regulations, that sort of thing. So we were looking at possibly developing an online exam that would be available to anyone to take, any background investigator to take 24/7 and be hosted on a learning portal. It would be a lot like what we currently require for our psychological evaluators. They're currently required to take an online exam, and that exam consists of questions based on what we have in our psychological screening manual, including our regulations. And so that would at least give some sort of training to background investigators. We also have a background investigation course. That is not required. It's a 32-hour minimum course. We're in the process of, and pretty much at the tail end of updating that course. We could require that as well, perhaps making the test itself a precursor to that course, and then making the course maybe required within a year something to that effect, which would help mitigate some of the issues with maybe the availability of the course or resources of especially small departments. Some other areas that we're considering, or at least that we could consider, would be to mandate something similar to what's required for the psychological evaluators, and that would be requiring maybe a suitability declaration signed by the background investigator indicating that they completed a thorough background investigation. There were no issues related to unsuitability for employment, that sort of thing. And then also another suggestion would be to perhaps mandate that a department, when an officer leaves a department, that the department submits some sort of form or fills out a form indicating why the individual left the department. So that is actually a recommendation we have for our psych evaluation as well, or at least the psychological process, is that we recommend that they fill out what's called a selection validation survey. So that's essentially a document that would indicate why they left it, or when they left. So was it during probation? Was it during FTO? Was it after a couple of years? And why they left? And there's a variety of kind of areas that they can check boxes and they can fill in information. And that was designed more as a feedback loop to the evaluator, so they can then see if there is an issue with, if they had passed this individual, is there something they should have looked at or differently that would have alluded to why the person did not, for example, maybe pass probation. So if we had something similar to that, it could also be looked at for investigations. Was there something that in their investigation that was not necessarily scrutinized as it should have, that resulted in them maybe not making it past FTO or what have you? And then if for some reason they did not, maybe they were terminated after a couple of years, then that information could then be used for, maybe there's something more related to the agency itself that could be resolved. So maybe it's an officer wellness issue or something to that effect. So those are some of our suggestions regarding maybe improving the background investigation process. Are there any questions related to any of this?
Mr. Chair, I had a question on that. On the, so would the test be required as well as the 32-hour background training, or are they in lieu of each other, or I wasn't clear on that?
So these are just options that we're just, that kind of ideas that we have. The test would be required for everyone. And I think that would be the easiest mechanism to take care of that, because it would be available 24/7. Anyone can take it and there'd be no cost to the agency. Ideally, I think it would be good to do both. The background investigation course contains a lot of information regarding post regulations, laws, the process, procedures. I think a lot of the people getting into background investigations they're coming from, they're either former law enforcement, some are PIs. They don't have experience necessarily doing background investigations. There are scenarios in the background investigation course that would assist in helping them at least determine the best way to conduct a background investigation. So ideally, I think having both, but maybe making the background investigation course required prior to conducting background investigations, and then making the background investigation, the online exam prior to conducting investigations, and then the course, perhaps making that required within maybe a year of when they started doing the background investigations. And that would help mitigate, I think, with some agencies that put maybe officers who are on light duty on background investigations for a period of time. You know, if they're only doing it for 6 months, then they wouldn't necessarily have to take the course if we're giving them 12 months in order to do that.
Okay, thank you. And I think those are reasonable recommendations. Thank you.
I have a question also. This is PJ Webb. Is it true or not true? Would this be a true statement that if a chief or a sheriff disagrees with the determination of a background investigator as to the suitability of a candidate, they could override that, right?
Correct. Yeah. The hiring authority, the chief, sheriff, whoever's the ultimate hiring authority, always has the final say. So that includes the psychological evaluation. So even if they're found suitable, if they determine, that's entirely up to them. Yes.
So going along with that, that's why I'm a little uncomfortable with I like the idea of having some sort of attestation being signed by somebody, but I'm not sure the background investigator would be the appropriate person for that because they're not the ultimate authority on hiring or not hiring. Maybe the hiring authority should attest to that. Kind of puts a background investigator between a rock and a hard place if they don't believe somebody is suitable, but the hiring authority says, you know what, I think you misunderstood that, and you get where I'm going with that?
Right. No, I understand. And that could be something that's either, maybe it's signed by both. The background investigator did a complete investigation, and then, suitability is determined by the agency or what have you. This is, again, early in the process, and it's just a consideration, but that's certainly something that could be looked at. And I do understand your point. Yes. Okay.
And as a former background investigator, I do fully support mandating some sort of training within some time period. There are a lot of specifics that folks overlook if they're not aware of them. So that would be good. I support that.
Yeah, I have a question too. This is Dave Honda. So, and you might have stated it, but is the psychological profile that the doctors use based on post requirements? Is that what you said? Or do they have their own parameters on which they evaluate someone? And has Post ever reviewed those parameters to see if it's relevant to current times?
Post requires a psychological evaluation. So the psychological evaluation has to be based on the candidate's medical records, has to be based on the personal history, so information that is garnered from the background investigation, as well as they have to assess. There's two different assessments they have to conduct. So one that assesses normal behaviors, and then one that assesses abnormal behaviors. So we don't specify what assessments they use. We do have a list of recommendations in our psych screening manual as far as which are generally used for evaluating, especially peace officer candidates. But we don't require a certain exam, but we do require that evaluation is conducted, and we do have parameters as far as how that's conducted. We do also have psych screening dimensions that are very similar to the background investigation dimensions. They're just different in how they're used. Backgrounds use it kind of for past behaviors, and then psychological kind of use it for, how are these going to manifest themselves later? And there are a list of critical incidents where it shows kind of how those play out later on in their career.
Okay, so I think you just answered the question. So there are dimensions that we require as Post.
Yes.
For the psychologist to kind of look for in a candidate.
Correct.
Okay.
Melanie, there's some specific characteristics and traits that the psychologist looks for in their assessment?
Yes. Yeah. The psychological screening dimensions. Correct.
Does that answer your question, Chief? There's some specific parameters for the medical expert to make their judgment on, rather than just sending them arbitrarily to a psychologist.
Yeah, I think that answers my questions. I just was wondering too, if we've ever reviewed those to see if they're relevant for, today's candidates for police, as far as violent behaviors or tendencies towards alcohol or abuses like that.
So we have, and those are part of those dimensions. So I don't have them right in front of me, I don't think. Maybe I might. So there are a variety of dimensions that are looked at. There are critical incidents that are looked at. This was the manual, and the dimensions were completed around 2013. And there are a list of critical incidents in there. So I would recommend taking a look at those as well. And it's something really that should be, the background investigator and the psychological evaluator really should work together if there are issues that come up. If there's an issue that comes up in the psych evaluation, they're required to, that would relate to backgrounds. They're required to provide that information to the background investigator and vice versa. And those dimensions are pretty comprehensive. But as with anything, I think there's always room for improvement. And if we need to take a look at those again or add to those, and there is legislation that just recently went through, where we're gonna have to start looking at regulations and changing information to meet that criteria as well.
All right, thank you very much.
And I have to say that I just went painstakingly through the dispatcher background with my stepson, And we went through every page of the personal history statement, and it was very arduous. And I can see how there's no way that they would not be able to find out about inappropriate behavior if you have a good background investigator. So I think it's still appropriate and applicable.
Melanie, if I may, I have a question at the end, but if you could expand, who is allowed, who's permitted by post to conduct a background investigation? We know that there's no certification, no requirement to go to training, but who can do a background? Who's allowed to do it?
So background investigations, there are no training requirements as mentioned. Background investigators, they have to either be employed by the agency as a background investigator. So anyone who's employed by an agency can conduct a background investigation. Third-party background investigators need to either be under a licensed PI or have to be an attorney. So those are kind of the three requirements, if you will. Is that your question?
Yes, that was it. I just wanted to expand on that. And then the other one is more of a question, and perhaps you can answer it. Maybe you don't know the answer. I don't know, because it falls a little on both your side and on TDC's side of the house. Is there anything that a background investigator does not have access to? In other words, can they go to a prospective agency and something not be shared with them? Do they have access to everything regarding that individual, both in the personnel file, the IA file? If it's from the IA file, can they see misconduct? Does it have to be sustained misconduct that they can see? What can they see? What can they not see?
So some of the laws, obviously, public records would be wide open. Those related to that PC 832.12, which is the misconduct. So the file that the department's required to maintain. There was an expansion on 832.7 of the penal code, which allowed for, again, I think public records into sustained misconduct of sexual assault or sustained findings of misconduct, sexual assault, discharging of a firearm at an individual, and then use of force that resulted in great bodily injury or death. So those were new as of January 2019. So they have access to that information. Aside from that, the candidate does sign waivers that are pretty extensive as far as what they're allowing the individual to look into, as far as what the department's going to allow. Generally they would allow them to look at personnel records and arrest records, that sort of thing. As far as other like IA, I think that is something that is not necessarily not permissible. It doesn't mean that agencies are always willing to share that information, which that becomes an issue, obviously, for some cases.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Director, there are retention periods that apply to some of those records as well. So some of those would be purged. So after a certain period of time, well, they may have happened, they wouldn't be in the file any longer.
Any other questions? Any comments? Thank you for that presentation.
Very well. Thank you very much, Melanie.
you.
Next to the podium, I'm going to invite Bureau Chief Mike Radford from Training Program Services. And at the request of the commission, he's going to provide a report on alternative control holds in lieu of the carotid restraint and control hold.
Good afternoon. Okay. So this is an informational report following a request from Commission to research possible options for the carotid restraint technique. So in preparation for this presentation, subject matter experts were brought in from both Northern and Southern California. These experts were experts in the areas of arrest control, martial arts, and we even had participant from the Gracie family, Renner Gracie. So it was a well-versed group. We first discussed what's the intent of the actual carotid application and what would that be for. So the intent of the carotid restraint obviously is to render a subject unconscious. So from there, we begin to look for methods in which how do you actually get that particular, how do you get the suspect unconscious? So just real briefly, we found that vascular restraint, chemical assistance such as anesthesia or chloroform, or blunt force trauma were really the only means of obtaining a way to render a person unconscious. So blunt force would be personal body weapons like a punch, baton, or a gunshot wound. So in an attempt to find maybe a method that not would actually replace, but we could try to find means to assist law enforcement in controlling subjects in lieu of putting someone unconscious, we were able to discuss a particular technique which is actually a recognized technique or a taught technique in both Southern California and Northern California. So even though there's probably an unlimited amount of ways to do different techniques, this was a particular one we wanted to bring and show for a particular purpose.
Here we see an officer using a seatbelt in order to restrain another individual. The effectiveness of this is based on his ability to control two quadrants of his body, the upper right and the upper left, by using a grip over his shoulder against his neck and one underneath the armpit. This allows him to flare out his elbow. Can you flare your elbow, please? Your right elbow. Which allows him to control the arm, all without actually putting any pressure on the carotid. If he switches to both arms underneath the armpits, he still has a decent amount of control, but can't actually control the suspect's head. This makes it difficult for him to control the individual and can start moving his head back and forth, potentially headbutt. He has access to both of his hands, whereas the officer cannot control the suspect's hands from this position. If he takes both arms over the neck, not only can this unintentionally become a carotid restraint, but it's also extremely easy for the individual to turn into him, grip his hand, and then start to go on the attack. Here we see a high elbow position from the seatbelt. Despite common misconceptions that this constricts the carotid artery, it doesn't. His left elbow is not in a position to sufficiently restrict circulation to the brain. His right elbow is nowhere near his other carotid. In this position, we are completely safe while handling a suspect without having to worry about any kind of restricted blood flow.
Hey, I'm here. What do you need? What do you need? Get his legs. Control his legs. All right, I got. You need to get him on his stomach. Okay. On your stomach. 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 Hey, I need to clear my left leg. I'm coming. All right, I got your left leg.
Okay, so we want to talk about a common misconception with regard to how a seatbelt grip differs from other grips that could be construed as carotid or actual direct carotid attacks. A simple example of this is the inversion of the seatbelt grip, where you can see that my hands are clasped together almost identically to the seatbelt grip from the back, where instead of applying pressure to his neck, I'm actually applying pressure to his jaw. In no way, shape, or form am I restricting blood flow to the carotid. This is a controlled maneuver using the exact same grip as before. Compare this to a grip where his arm makes contact, his shoulder and potentially his biceps will make contact with his carotid. Now, my grip has changed, and the positioning of my arms has changed in such a way that when I apply pressure, particularly from the opposite side of his body, I can initiate a direct attack on the carotid. Counter this with, can you sit up please? And face that way. Seated. Where, again, I use the exact same grip. No matter how high I go with this grip, there's no actual carotid restraint or carotid cutoff. Compare this, as unlikely as this is, to a grip here where I apply the exact same maneuver as I did previously from the side control position, where I can initiate a carotid restraint relatively easily. No matter how hard I grip here, When gripping appropriately, there's no actual pressure on his carotid. I cannot physically choke him unconscious here or apply pressure to the trachea when my hands are gripped or when my hands are in position.
So looking at this one particular technique that seemed to be one particular technique that most of the subject matter experts agree or like to use in lieu of, we did want to look at some of the pros and cons. The pro is it does allow officers to maintain control of a subject from a back position similar to a carotid restraint position. It can also be used in a takedown position from a standing position. And it could also be used to control a combatant from a ground position as well. Some of the con positions that we did want to put out was even with control, the subject does remain conscious and possibly combative during the incident. And there is no identified cuffing technique for combative subjects with just a solo officer conducting the particular technique. So with that, we wanted to bring some recommendations. And though maybe we're not saying this particular technique is a recommendation, we did want to bring the recommendation for training of multiple officers in a singular combative subject in that training venue. We found that there wasn't any recognized training where multiple officers are working together jointly in a cooperative manner to control one particular subject. With the removal of the carotid restraint, the recommendation of putting some sort of ground control update in the perishable skills program, doing some sort of ground control every 2 years. Also adopting control holds in ground control techniques. So having an understanding or some trained knowledge of controlling subjects from the ground position other than just the standing position like we currently train. And the final recommendation is the continued of the teaching of the defense of the carotid restraint. The importance of teaching officers how to defend themselves from a vascular restraint attempt is paramount. So with that, I could open to any questions anyone would have.
Committee, questions?
No, Honda, just a comment. I just think any tool we can get our officers is a positive thing. And especially if it's something that can save their lives and keep them out of the negative aspect of the media. So I like that alternative. I know there's a lot more that we have to work on as far as handcuffing and stuff, but I think it's a good start.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments or questions? Thank you for that presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. Next to the podium, I'm going to invite Staff Services Manager Megan Kataffi, who's going to provide us with a report on updates to the legislature.
Good afternoon, advisory committee members. The legislature concluded their session on August 31st, and the governor has either signed or vetoed legislation by September 30th. There were many bills on police reform that did not make it off the Assembly or Senate floor, and many others that did not receive a signature by the governor. But this only indicates the work that will be forthcoming in the next session. My handout here that's on the screen and also included in the commission agenda packet indicates the status of all the bills that Post was tracking, but there are several that I do want to highlight that deserve attention. The first bill is AB 846, We've talked about it briefly already. This bill updates the government code on peace officer minimum standards to include that peace officers be free from any physical, emotional, or mental condition, including bias against race or ethnicity, gender, nationality, religion, disability, or sexual orientation that might adversely affect the exercise of the powers of a peace officer. This bill also requires Post to study, review, and update our regulations associated with the screening materials. And we have until January 1st of 2022 to do so. AB 1196, this is the bill that prohibits the authorization of the use of the carotid restraint or chokehold. And these are all bills that were signed. AB 1506, this bill states the Attorney General shall investigate incidents of an officer-involved shooting resulting in the death of an unarmed civilian. DOJ shall also create a police practices division by July 1st of 2023, where upon request, any law enforcement agency can request a review of their deadly force policy. And then the final bill I want to discuss is AB 1945. This bill adds public safety dispatchers or public safety telecommunicators to the government code to be considered a first responder. This does not change any training or other requirements. So the legislature is currently out until December, when they will welcome any new legislators following the upcoming election, and they will begin their work for the next two-year session in January of 2021. In the interim, a new committee, the Assembly Select Committee on Police Reform, has formed. This committee is chaired by Assemblymember Gibson, and its members were chosen by the Speaker of the House, Anthony Rendon. Their first meeting was on October 14th and included a lot of open discussion with some educators, police chiefs, attorneys, and activists. The topics discussed were hiring standards, including the topic of if peace officers should be required to have a higher level of education to be considered for employment, police training for both in-service and at the academy level, crowd management, decertification, qualified immunity, and much, much more. I expect more to come from this committee as their discussions continue. Also of note, the governor's policing advisors issued a report with recommendations on improving law enforcement response to protests and demonstrations, and I believe all that information was sent out last week. As we delve into the next session, I have had some discussions with various legislative staff surrounding the topic of this higher education requirement for peace officers, how to recruit more women and minorities, and also regarding hate crimes, racial profiling, decertification, and crowd management. So all of those conversations lead me to believe we will have a very busy 2021. Are there any questions?
Yes, it's PJ Webb. I hope this is the right place on the agenda to address this, but I did want to bring up a piece of legislation that kind of didn't show up on our radar until it was already chaptered, which conflicts with post regulations, and it's regarding probationary periods. AB 1353 from WICS basically amended the educational code, basically setting the maximum for school classified employees' probationary periods to 6 months. And post requires a 12-month probationary period for peace officers. I don't think that there was an intentional omission of an exemption for police classes. Reading the hearing notes, I believe the intent of this legislation was to bring this section in line with those school districts that fall within the merit system. And that section is actually 45301 of the Ed Code, specifically exempts police classes and other classification of employees. But the issue we have now, though, is a concern of some of these school districts with police departments being forced by this new law to not fall within post regulations. And I would hope we could figure out some way to hold them harmless while we work on getting this section amended to exempt the police classes.
I wasn't aware of this bill, so I can certainly look into it a little bit more. And if it definitely is, I mean, it sounds like it's a conflict, we can work on some sort of cleanup language to fix that for us.
That would be great. Yeah. Oh, I've just received a lot of concerns from some of the affected agencies. They don't want to lose their ability for any post reimbursement or anything of that sort. I don't know if the commission needs to address anything with that.
If you could put your mind at ease, Mr. Webb, there's, it will actually, we can consult with our attorney tomorrow, but there are several other instances specifically with members of the military where our regulatory matters are in conflict with state and federal law. And in that capacity, Post has always yielded to the legislation as the overriding factor involved. And Post has taken a position that we would not penalize members of the military for the extension in their probationary period, but we'll ask our attorney. But the guidance we've gotten in the past is we simply would ask for an attestation from an agency that the person has passed probation rather than take any punitive action with respect to compliance with Post mandates. But we'll consult with our attorney to make sure we're in line. And again, if Megan needs to approach the legislature to get some legislation clean up, or even approach the commission to clean up the regulation, we can certainly do so.
Very good. Appreciate that.
I have a quick question for Sergeant Webb, if I may. Are you done with field training within 6 months at your agency, or no? Are they still going through field training at that point?
My agency is within the merit system, as most are. It's some of the smaller school districts aren't. So no, we have a full year probation for all police classes, even when they promote. So our field training takes it through that whole year pretty much.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Very well.
Hearing none, thank you for that presentation. Mr. Webb, thank you for that update also. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Megan. Next up to the podium, I'm going to invite law enforcement consultant Julie Gorwood. She's going to give a report on the proposed changes to Commission Regulation 10005, which addresses the basic course waiver.
Good afternoon. The basic course waiver process is an option for peace officers from other states to meet the regular basic course training requirement. Applicants submit documentation of prior law enforcement training and service. The process compares the entry level and in-service training to California requirements. Applicants who meet the minimum training requirement can proceed to the basic course waiver assessment process, which assesses job knowledge and skill levels. The proposed revisions to the basic course waiver application form is to make it consistent with current regulations. One example of that is the current changes that took effect on October 1st, which were the changes like to LD 26, 41, and 43. Those needed to be changed on the legislative mandated self-assessment form. The form is actually currently being reviewed by the Office of Administrative Law as a Form 100 non-substantive change. And we expect that it will be filed and approved today or tomorrow. All the changes on the form are approved by Commission and the Office of Administrative Law. The form was brought to the Commission in case there were any rejection of any of the proposed changes by the Office of Administrative Law. As of speaking to him this week, I'm hoping that this will go through, but just in case. Does the advisory committee have any specific questions to any of the proposed changes on the form?
Committee, any questions? Any concerns? This is an item that's going to be voted on by the commission. Are we comfortable in giving our consent for that, or does anyone have any questions or concerns that we should relay to the commission before they vote on this item? Okay. Hearing none, unfortunately, I don't see any of you on my end. So hearing none, I'm going to say no. And thank you for that presentation.
Very well. Thank you very much, Julie. Our next presentation is going to be a report on restructuring of the advisory committee, and that will be done by me. Exactly 2 years ago, the commission started an endeavor to look at the composition of the advisory committee as well as the performance of the committee as well. As this matter has evolved, the commission has been able to come to consensus as exactly which direction they want to go to. But to give some history, this was prompted by not only staff, but several commissioners who expressed a desire to increase the capacity for the committee to serve the commission, specifically to expand the engagement of the committee, the interaction of the committee, and the guidance of the committee to the commission. It was also to ensure that there was a greater level of review of the agenda items to provide guidance as the eyes and ears of the commission in all four corners of the state. And the third component was to ensure that there was a great representation of the stakeholders that represent all of the 100,000 plus personnel that Post serves. So specifically, the commission asked staff to review and make recommendations, and you can see them in the specific agenda item that is attached before you. Specifically, the staff recommended that we slightly modify the composition of the committee to make sure that we have representation from the major professional organizations, representation from the major labor organizations, and then also to ensure there was a smattering of representation from a variety of interests to represent the variety of types of individuals who serve in a capacity in law enforcement. So you can see the recommendations that were provided by the staff that were codified in the February 2020 commission meeting by the commission before you to make your recommendations and to analyze. Tomorrow at the meeting, we're going to specifically ask the chair of the commission to take the matter under consideration and consider several components. Specifically, we're going to ask whether or not the commission would like to either restructure the composition of the committee and redefine their performance measures. We'll ask for a motion to either approve or modify or decline the recommendations for an official policy statement that defines the performance outcomes and expectations of the committee, as well as at the request of one of the commissioners, a statement of the committee's and commission's commitment to diversity and inclusion in all respects with respect to selection of committee members. Third, to entertain a motion to reappoint several of the current members if we are not restructured, to ensure that they have brand new terms starting. Several of you members here today have your terms that were expired last year, and we've been extending them, or the commission has been extending them, but a motion will be brought forward to see if the commission would like to re-extend those. And finally, there are 3 letters before the commission for nomination. One of the letters is for a member of the California State Chancellor's Office who's been formally been nominated by her respective agency. Her name is Dr. Sheenie Weber. And 2 other letters from law enforcement, one from a law enforcement officer requesting a position as a public member, and one from a non-peace officer requesting a nomination as a peace officer. With that, I will yield to you, Mr. Chair, and the committee members for any questions or discussions you may have.
Committee, any questions, any comments and concerns? I know this has been an ongoing topic we've been having for some time. I'd like to take a moment to hear from all of you if possible, so we can share our voice with the commission tomorrow.
Kathy O'Born, representing KG. Just a question about the person that the state chancellor's office is going to appoint or be part of the committee. Are they looking for someone from the chancellor's office or someone just from the community college system?
I'll do my best to answer that. I don't know the genesis of how that position came about, but prior commissions probably decades ago, made the choice to specifically ask for a position assigned to the California Community College Chancellor's Office. So I believe the answer is it is specific to the California Community College Chancellor's Office, not to a more broad category of an instructor or educator in the community college system. Did I answer that, or was I too nebulous?
You got it, Scott. You're good.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions or concerns?
Yeah, Scott, this is Dave. I just had a question about the public position. So what's the purpose of the public position when a sworn police officer can apply for that? Just maybe some clarification for me.
We're leaving that to the commission. One of the things we tried to do was mirror the composition of the commission. The actual composition of the commission is codified in statute, and there are specific members of the public. We tried to mirror that, and the intent was maybe to get the perspective of a genuine member of the public who has no peace officer experience. I will say this, the committee you sit on is not required by legislation or statute. It is exclusively decided by the commission. But again, that was the intent, to gather input from true members of the public that have no background nor any law enforcement perspective, so we get a broader representation of interest.
Okay, so the application for this committee, we're not precluding someone who's already an active law enforcement member.
That would be up to the commission. The staff's recommendation that we actually get a true member of the public so they can provide a view from a different lens from somebody who is either a current or a former peace officer.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a question. This is Damian Sandoval. So Scott, it seemed like there were different pieces of recommendations you were asking for. Is it possible to kind of break them down, or did I just kind of get lost in what was being asked? It seemed like there were pieces that you were looking for opinions on.
Well, no, you didn't get lost. It's been a cascading genesis over the last couple of years. The long story short is what staff has recommended to the commission is that we get representation from several different primary stakeholders. So we want the professional organizations, Cal Chiefs, Cal Sheriffs, as well as the Highway Patrol, because they, even though they're not part of either of those two parties, they do represent, I think, almost 10% of the state's law enforcement officers. The second component is representation from labor to represent the interests of the line staff, the boots on the ground, so to speak. And the third component was to get a more contemporary feel for what's going on in four corners of the state. And that's why staff recommended that we try to select individuals who are current peace officers, either at the sergeant or a rank below, that can provide a contemporary experience of what's going on the streets that maybe management or the labor organizations who may be slightly insulated from the street may not have an opportunity to do so.
Thank you.
Hey, Scott, sorry, I got one more question. I might have lost you, but you were talking about performance objectives for this committee?
It's performance outcomes, just an expectation of what the commission would like, whether or not they would like, what type of guidance they would like from you, whether or not they would actually write reports from the committee. I think mainly the commission was looking for a greater level of input because like many people, they may be slightly insulated from what's going on across the state. And this committee is in the best position to be the eyes and ears of what's going on in law enforcement, as well as the communities at large, to give them guidance when they make their decisions.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'll just make a comment that, yes, through the last couple of years and the meetings that we've been through, there's been a lot of really fruitful discussion on this. And I think the consensus that it came to in the last couple of meetings that is in our agenda item I think is a good balance, and I think represents what the our committee and the commission has brought forth. And I just recommend approving this for the commission.
Thank you, Randy. I'm going to make a comment also. I see that, I know in the last meeting, not the August one, but the last meeting we had, there was commissioners who were in favor of obviously keeping CLEA as a separate member on that committee, as a position on that. And I noticed that now it's shown again that we're going to have them absorbed through PORAC. And I feel that that's taken away a voice from CCLEA. And also, I know I mentioned this, and it sounds like it's broken record, but if we're talking about representing everyone in the state who is a stakeholder, who is part of the POST program, who POST gives a POST certificate to, once again, I don't see any talks or considerations of the California State Coroner Association, or CSCA, who is also a member of POST and obviously has peace officers that get POST certificates from the organization. I do see our public safety dispatchers on there, but we don't have that aspect of it being considered. I would ask that would be a topic that maybe we can approach if necessary and share with the commission. I know this has been ongoing for some time, and without a doubt, I think it needs to come to an end. Based on what I see on paper, obviously I would say my seat would be, this would be the last time I'll be with you guys based on that, if CCLEA is asked to be taken off. But even with that, I would have to say it's time to make a decision. So I would ask our committee here for additional votes of yes or no. That way we can share with the commission, please.
I will offer this, Mr. Chair. I understand Under Sheriff Waltz recommended they move forward, and you express your concerns. These agenda items are they're a canvas, so the commission is the ultimate authority. If they approve it or not, they do have the authority to modify it and maintain a position. These agenda items are simply a draft for them to take under consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Loggins, and I understand that. I just wanted the committee to remember, whoever may have not been present with us last time, that there was discussion with that, and that there was support for CCLEA to remain on the committee, and also that, to possibly take into consideration, maybe our committee here has recommendations. Maybe they don't agree with what I'm asking or saying. I know we've talked about this before, so I just want everyone to hear. I appreciate that, Mr. Loggins. Any other questions or comments I can take?
Mr. Chair, this is Jamie Young, if I may. I would like to make a comment about the public safety dispatcher position, only to say that there is a public safety dispatch advisory council that is a council through POST. Instead of leaving it open to a public safety dispatcher with really no organization that approves or recommends who that representative would be, I would request that that position be vetted by the Public Safety Dispatch Advisory Council. And then I'm not quite sure what and this might sound a little self-benefiting here, but not sure what the active dispatcher versus another status is for, other than I get to get the most current, or someone who is actively behind a console. But I'm not sure that that is what the advisory council would recommend. So I'm wondering if that could be at the discretion of the advisory council, as opposed to recommended by this particular document. That's all I have. Thank you.
Young, I can answer that question. The intent was, you nailed it on the head, was just to get a contemporary perspective. Again, it would be up to the commission if they want to entertain the idea of still moving forward with a contemporary current dispatcher, but asking that be vetted through that particular organization. That was exclusively intent to get a contemporary look, not only from the peace officer side, but from the dispatcher house as well.
Thank you.
Committee, I would love to ask everyone to give me a yay or nay in approving or recommending this to the commission. Again, I can't see everybody. Is there anyone that's not for this being recommended to the commission?
I kind of agree with you, Arden, that the CCLEA represents a whole big group of various law enforcement agencies, and should the commission decide to eliminate that as an association or agency member, then maybe a contemporary one or both of the contemporary law enforcement peace officer positions should come from a recommendation of CCLEA at the very least. That would be my input.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, this is Dave Honda. I got a question. Can we approve the recommendation with the with adjustments that we just recommended, that we keep the CCLEA and Jamie Young's recommendation that the dispatcher be a part of an association?
So we can recommend anything to the commission. That doesn't mean it's a change in any which way. I can convey our concerns and our thoughts to the commission, but ultimately it's the commission that makes those decisions and can make those changes. But I'll be more than happy to tell them what we heard today here regarding CCLEA and the public safety dispatchers being part of vetted through the Public Safety Advisory Council for them, or Dispatcher Advisory Council, rather than just that public safety dispatcher.
Yeah, so I guess if everyone here is in agreement, or mostly in agreement, that we recommend the report with the addition or additional recommendations that were just put out, do we need to make a motion, or do we need to vote on that somehow? Or
we don't really vote, or we don't make decisions on that. So, but I will take our comments and thoughts to the commission and offer suggestions for them to consider. That way, we will tell them what we think as the committee advising the commission and what we think may be best, and allow them to obviously make a motion on that and make a decision on that tomorrow. So.
I may, Mr. Chair, if I
right. So I think you're missing my point. So I just want to make sure as an advisory committee, we're on the same page and that we all agree that our recommendations for the commission to vote on are the same. And so I just want to make sure that we're, as a committee, are kind of on the same page. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chair, this is Eric Schmidt. I have a comment.
Yes, sir.
So if I understand it right, you're wanting to, so CCLEA has just been, since I sit here and represent PORAC, they've just been brought in as members of PORAC and actually occupy a board of directors seat on our board. So wouldn't that just fall under, wouldn't CCLEA fall back under PORAC as sitting on this advisory committee? Since they are now members of PORAC and sitting on, or taking a seat on the board of directors on that organization.
Commissioner Smith, just to give you an understanding, I agree with what you're saying, sir. CCLEA and PORAC didn't always work together as closely. There was a time where they were separated. That CCLA did not have a seat on that board, and for that purpose and that purpose only is what I was asked by our group to obviously ask for that seat for us to remain with the committee to provide our voice for that with CCLEA if that does ever happen again.
If I can offer just a quick clarification, I could be wrong, but I don't believe CCLEA is on the board. I think CSLEA just came on the board of PORAC. I don't believe CCLEA as an organization is.
Not being on the board, I can't answer that question with CCLEA. I'm just a member for representing back or reporting information to CCLEA from post and taking recommendations from them if there are any. So I can't answer that question. I apologize. I will check into that definitely.
Chair, if I could just.
Any other comments?
Bernard.
Mr. Loggins, yes, go ahead.
I'm just trying to clarify before you vote, because I will need to provide specific direction to our chair tomorrow. Just so I understand it correctly, prior to vote, the consideration the committee's taken for this matter is to accept the draft composition of the advisory committee with the following modifications. Number one, we would keep the contemporary public safety dispatcher position, but that would be somehow vetted or authorized through the dispatch council. And the second component modification was to convert one of the contemporary law enforcement peace officer positions to maintain the CCLEA representation. And the remainder of the draft would remain intact.
Yes, Mr. Loggins, we like to keep that the way you mentioned it.
Okay.
If that's okay. I'd like to take a vote from my committee if it's possible.
Mr. Chair, before the vote, please, if I may, the dispatch council would like it to just say that it is a public safety dispatcher as vetted through their council. That's the request of the organization instead of having contemporary on there. They haven't had a chance to discuss it in terms of whether or not an active dispatcher versus someone that represents the organization, like a training manager would be an appropriate person, a training coordinator from a dispatch agency, or an operations manager. So I think that for the purposes of this process, if we could just remove contemporary.
That would
be at the wishes of the PSAC. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Bernard.
Yes, sir.
I support CCLEA staying on the advisory committee. I just looked up the board of directors of PORAC. CSLEA is joined PORAC recently, and Alan Barcelona is the president of that organization. So CCLEA is not a member of PORAC at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Bernard, for that update. I appreciate that, sir.
Yeah, this is Eric Schmidt weighing back in. He is correct. I misunderstood the acronym, so I do apologize on that. I have no objection.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your comment.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, Dave Honda, do you want me to make a motion?
Please, sir.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to approve the recommendations with the modifications that Assistant Director Loggins wrote down.
Kathy Oborn, second.
Thank you. Any nays? Anyone abstaining from this? Thank you for that. Motion passes. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Loggins.
If I may ask, Mr. Chair, does the committee want to make a recommendation on staff's recommendation regarding the policy statement as well as the commitment to diversity and inclusion, or do you want to leave that for discussion with the commission tomorrow?
One more time for that, Mr. Loggins. Which two topics?
There were a couple more components of this agenda item. The second one was whether this committee wants to make a recommendation on adopting the policy statement as well as the commitment to diversity and inclusion. Then after that, I will ask, the commission asked this committee if they wanted to, at their discretion, to discuss the three recommended new members of the commission if they fit within the constraints of the recommended board. So that would be the member of the public, the nomination from the chancellor's office, as well as I believe his name is Mr. Fitch. And if the committee's not had an opportunity to look at it, they can refrain from commentary.
I know I'll speak for myself. I did run ahead a little bit and look at this stuff. Committee, anyone prepared to discuss this topic and give a recommendation and make a motion on offering the commission some insight on what we think on these topics?
Kathy Ward from, sorry, representing the community colleges. I can only say I can, if we're talking about the state chancellor's office, right, Scott, that's what you're saying, whether they should have a position or not. I guess one of the issues, I'm sorry, what?
Commissioners asked for input from the committee on the nominations.
Right.
This committee supports it or not.
I see the importance of having them on, especially since 40 some odd of our police facilities are through the community colleges. So there certainly is some interest in there. Plus a lot of the problems that we had recently with our state chancellor, sort of a knee-jerk reaction about what happened in Minnesota and how it all fell back on the community college administration of justice programs. It was quite a backlash that we're going through right now that we're still trying to clean up. I am shocked that there's not a lot of understanding from our state chancellor's office of what is going on in California with police training and post and all that. So I definitely see a benefit of having a member there and keeping those lines of communications open.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other comments? Mr. Webb, I saw you came on earlier.
Yeah, I support the staff's recommendation as to the policy statements as they're written.
Okay. So if I can ask you to hold on to that for a minute, Mr. Webb, let's work on the three individuals being considered to be for the actual committee first, and then we'll go back to that. I appreciate that if it's okay with you. Thank you. Anyone else regarding the three positions? I understand we have one definitely interested in keeping the chancellor's office and the benefits that we get from that. I do concur with that myself. Anybody else?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that this is Dave Honda again, that the public position is in line with what the purpose of that is, because he was a sworn law enforcement officer, right?
One of the individuals is a current sworn officer. One of the individuals is not.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with him being an officer. I just want to make sure it's in line with what post is intending.
If the commission adopts the recommended restructuring, the public member who is not a peace officer, that position will not be there.
Okay.
So maybe a moot point, Chief Honda.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
I only brought that up because a commissioner specifically directed us to ask the committee to give any input or at least take a look at those letters. If the committee elects to decline to have any comment, that's absolutely fine.
Well, so just in line with this, sorry, I keep asking a lot of questions, but so what's the purpose? I know the purpose of the member of the public, but how would that person be selected? I mean, what kind of input would they give when they have no idea of what law enforcement does, what our training does?
That was under the current construct. There's two public members. I couldn't tell you the intent of the commission when they created these positions probably 40 plus years ago. I can only assume it was to mirror the public members that are codified in statute for the commission. Under the new restructuring, that exclusive public member would be eliminated and replaced by a contemporary law enforcement officer. So this may be a moot point for that individual.
Okay, got it.
Mr. Chair, Jason. I was just going to comment, I would support the remaining recommendations from staff with regards to the advisory committee to include the diversity. And then with regards to the three letters, I'm in support of the California Community Colleges position, as well as the letter from Mr. Fitch. I would have some questions on the remaining application.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
I know
If I
that
may, Go ahead, Randy.
In previous discussions, we talked about outreach, about reaching out for the contemporary law enforcement positions as well. When we had previous discussions about the public members. And so I think there really should be some sort of outreach before a decision is made. At least that would be my recommendation, that it shouldn't be just the first one to write a letter because they heard that it was open, that they should get awarded because they're the only applicant. I think we should have some sort of outreach and vet some individuals that are interested.
Thank you, Randy. Any other comments or concerns? If I may take a few seconds and speak on Mr. Fitch. Ken Fitch is a LA County deputy sheriff, and I know he's got a extensive background. If you read his letter, he speaks to volumes on what we can use on the commission, or at the committee, I should say. He brings not only training experience, but he also brings executive experience. He's in an administrative position in their respective agency, and he has a good, solid background in law enforcement. I know in the past we talked about having diversity and having the boots on the ground, as Mr. Loggins would say. I think Mr. Fitch would represent that in the committee, but obviously I like the idea what Randy also said about vetting positions and vetting people who come in, but knowing that we don't always have individuals that are interested, that actually have this kind of background, I'm going to agree that Mr. Fitch should be considered, as the chief said, and also the chancellor's position. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, this is Jamie Young again. I guess the question that I have is that for the 2 temporary law enforcement officers, what is the process for selecting them? So hypothetically, you get 50 people after outreach occurs, if that were to be the process. How does that occur? Does that get vetted from post staff? Does it get vetted from the advisory committee with recommendations to the commission? What would be the process?
I'm going to defer that to Mr. Loggins. Mr. Loggins, can you comment on that for us, please?
I can answer that. Under the current construct that we inherited, there is no process. It was policy by seat of our pants, or policy by whatever we could figure out. Under the current construct, the recommended policy procedures that's in this agenda item, there's an actual vetting process where the commission would direct staff to send out public inquiries and then get applications. And it specifically says that if there's a substantial number of applications, the commission would give staff authority to have a vetting process so they can give a reasonable composition of applicants for them to review. So short answer is there is no process now. The recommendations we've made as staff, there will be a specific formalized process.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, this is Manny Alvarez. I think our intent was to break up the state into quadrants, so to speak, and rotate those positions. So the sergeant or below contemporary officers, deputies would come from those regions, would serve for a period of 2 years, I think is the number that we looked at. And then they would rotate out and somebody else from that region would come in. So they wouldn't be permanently assigned or permanently named to the committee, and they wouldn't all be from one specific region.
Mr. Alvarez or Mr. Loggins, question in that matter. What happens if we don't have somebody from that quadrant at that time? Do we leave that seat vacant, or do we move on to a different applicant at that point?
It's such a small pool, it would always be full. And to complement what the executive director said, our intent is to get a variety of disciplines. So we may have a deputy sheriff from a northern county and a police officer from a major municipality. We may have somebody representing a park system, a Department of Forestry. So the vast array of peace officers represented, not just large municipalities and either Los Angeles, Sacramento, or the Bay Area.
Thank you for that. Committee, let's decide on our advice to the commission today. Do we want to, at this moment, use what Mr. Waltz said and the concerns we had about selection and convey our concern and our thoughts to the commission that we would not want to go ahead and just jump on the first ones we're getting, and that we want to create an opportunity to vet these individuals? Or do you feel comfortable today to recommend these to the commission for tomorrow's meeting? If I can have a quick vote on that, I'd appreciate that, please. Or a motion to go either way. Either approve what we have in our hand or don't approve it and go with the thought of creating a vetting process.
Mr. Chair, Jason Saws, I can take a stab at a multi-part motion. So approve the remaining recommendations from staff for the Post Advisory Committee. Accept the diversity rationale. I would still move to approve the community college nomination and agree with Mr. Waltz, since these are new positions, to do some more marketing for the remaining and accept more applications.
Okay, thank you for that.
I would second that motion.
Yeah.
Making sure I understand what we're saying, so we're going to go ahead and approve or recommend, I should say, the Chancellor of California Community Colleges to the committee and ask that there is a vetting process for other applicants. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Excellent. Anyone abstaining or any nays with this? Anyone not wanting to comment? Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. Take that as a approval to recommend that motion from us to, or that to the committee tomorrow.
Very well.
Mr. Loggins?
Appreciate everybody's patience and perseverance with me. Next, I'm going to invite Staff Services Manager Michelle Weiler from the Training, Delivery, and Compliance Bureau. And she's going to give a report on items G and H. G is a report on the request to amend Regulation 10.5 regarding minimum topics for professional skills. And after that, she'll give a report on item H, which is a report on a request to amend Regulation 1001, which has to do with definitions. And we will be reminding the commission tomorrow that these two items are contingent upon one another. If one passes, the other will need to pass, or vice versa. Otherwise, there will be a conflict in regulation that we may not be able to do compliance with. Michelle?
Good afternoon, everyone. I think there was actually 3 items that was requested. The other was item F.
Oh, you're right.
1052.
There we go.
So that first item is a revisit from an item that was presented in June before this committee and the commission. And it had to do with instructors being able to receive partial credit for courses that they were both instructing and enrolled as a student. At the time we presented, there was going to be no credit available to instructors for that purpose. The commission asked us to revisit it because they were concerned about individuals enrolling in a course and not being able to receive credit. So we have revisited, we've made some adjustments. At the time, there was some concern about the qualifications of the instructors coming into question. So we've made some adjustments there in terms of how these instructors would demonstrate their qualifications to teach in that particular subject matter area. And then we've added an opportunity for them to receive partial credit for any portion of a course in which they are not instructing. So for example, if there's a 24-hour course, they're teaching 4 hours of that course, they would be able to receive credit for the remaining 20 hours as long as they were enrolled as a student in that course. As a note, that credit does not apply to instructors of the perishable skills courses who currently meet the criteria for the perishable skills exemption due to current instruction in the perishable skills program. However, it does apply to the instructors that have not taught within the current CPT cycle. The exemption also does not apply to any individual that is currently enrolled in the regular basic course, the specialized investigators basic course, or any of the PC 832 course. Are there any questions on item F?
Commissioners, any questions or comments? I have a question just right off the cuff, if you can please clarify. So if I take a course that's a 24-hour course regarding, I don't know, let's say basket weaving for now, and part of it I instruct, I only get, if I do 4 hours of it, I get 20 hours of credit for that course. Does that mean I completed that course in the long run?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of your question.
Does that mean I completed that course and I get a certificate for that course in theory? If I teach 4 hours of a 24-hour course and I get credit for 20 hours that I did not teach, does that mean I've completed that course and now I can say I've taken that course?
So for the example of a 24-hour course, yes, because it meets that requirement of completing 90% of the course. So you would be able to receive course completion for that particular example.
Commissioners, any questions?
If you actually, yeah, so I guess just to clarify, if you are enrolled as a student in that course and then you're asked to instruct the 4 hours, you would receive the credit for the remaining 20 hours that you attend as a student. Just to make sure that it's clear.
Okay.
So I have a question.
Yes.
A statement that is kind of a question. We have an instructor who is a subject matter expert delivering the current and approved certified information to the students.
Mhm.
Is present while it is being delivered, is the expert delivering it, but cannot receive credit for having that knowledge. That's what we're saying. That 4 hours then can't be credited to that person for having that knowledge. In other words, they can't get 24 hours of training credit. Seems to me if they have prepared and delivered certified level training and they are an expert, that then they should get credit for having that knowledge, which is what we're giving the students the same credit for, having that knowledge. And not only do they have it, they have the ability to deliver it and be certified as an instructor to do so. So it seems a little counterproductive to me. And I'd like that to be a point of discussion for the commission advisory members.
So I'm not sure if you are specifically addressing perishable skills. In that instance, there would be an exception to, or an exemption, I should say, to where the instructor in a perishable skills program course would not be required to meet that particular perishable skills requirement. So say somebody's instructing firearms PSP, they would not be required to complete the firearms PSP for that cycle because it's recognized that they have that expertise. And that's why they are instructing that course. I'm not sure if that addresses your question.
It addresses that piece of it. I guess the balance is for a person delivering, for instance, cognitive information that they have to put together, package, and deliver.
I think staff's intent was just to make sure you could not be instructing or teaching at the same, or be a student and instructor at the same time. Not that anybody would take advantage of it. We wanted to rest assured that when somebody signed a roster and it was completed, we could attest that person actually was actively learning rather than serving in an instructor capacity.
Correct. And as an instructor, they would have to demonstrate their subject matter expertise to teach, or their qualifications to teach that particular subject matter. So we're already recognizing their, I guess, their subject matter expertise. We're acknowledging that they have that experience.
Randy,
if I can clarify something quickly, so if you were saying that the person has a subject matter expert and is teaching the course, they can't get credit for the knowledge and expertise they bring in for that 4-hour block, but they get credit for the other 20. That's the part that's kind of difficult sometimes. You take the course we discussed earlier, the background investigator course, for example, that we talked about. If I would go do the technology portion of that course and teach it, when in Fresno, I took that course, and I understand if I teach that portion, I don't get credit for it. So then at the end of the year, we may consider that being one of the courses you need to be a background investigator. Does that mean I did not complete that course because I only had 28 hours out of the, or I should say 22 hours or 26 hours, whatever that was, versus the 32 minimum hours for that course? So is that how is that kind of right if the person is the expert in that course and is teaching it and not getting credit for it?
So one of the items in this particular proposed amendment indicates that you can demonstrate your qualifications to teach the course through demonstration of significant experience, successfully practicing the skill, completion of a non-post course which meets the equivalency based on content or comparison review, or completion of a post-certified course within that subject matter. And those are in line with the requirements. So we have the 1070 courses, and then the 1082 lists the requirements for the course content, and it kind of falls in line with that. And so if you can demonstrate that you have that experience from somewhere else, whether it's taking that training elsewhere, you've met those qualifications, and then you wouldn't necessarily have to meet the requirements for that course, if that makes sense.
Randy Waltz, we had a lot of the same discussion. I don't know, was it a couple of years ago when we were talking about the perishable skills instructors? I think that I know the commission agreed that if an instructor has that level of expertise, and this one's, I think, even better argument for it, if they have that level of expertise and they're teaching a portion of the class and they're sitting in the rest of the class, that at least from my perspective as an instructor and as a student, that I think these situations are rare, but I think they should be getting the full credit for that class. But I think the situations are rare in most cases that person would be teaching and be a student in the class at the same time. But I think it might be more common with smaller agencies that are presenters that are doing some of their own material. And it would be more of a hardship to have additional presentations where you don't have the ability to have that particular instructor sit in on the whole version of that course.
Kathy Oborn here. Just as an educator, I can't imagine somebody teaching a class and actually getting credit for being a student in the class while they're teaching the class. There's a distinction between someone who's training or a teacher versus people that are learning from that individual. And I think that personally, I know when I went through LAPD, everybody that taught the classes, the extra training classes that I was involved in, they never got credit for teaching the class. They were there as the subject matter expert in teaching the class. Does that make sense?
Thank you, ma'am. Any other comments or questions? Okay, how about we I make a motion to recommend this to our commission tomorrow? Can I get a second?
Just clarification, what are we voting on?
To recommend that the commission adopt this and approve it. The idea that what you're saying is correct, that the student and the instructor, you don't get credit for that 4 hours that you're teaching out of 24.
Thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome, ma'am. Do I have a second? Okay. Hearing none, we're not going to recommend this to the commission tomorrow.
Mr. Chair, we're coming up on a 2-hour mark. With your permission, may we take a 10-minute break and let everybody stretch their legs?
Yes, please. Thank you for that.
According to our computer time, is 3:56 coming up on. How about we come back at 4:06, Mr. Chair?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, are we all back? I can only see one person, unfortunately, on my end.
Back, at least on my screen, I can see everybody.
Excellent, sir. Okay, if we may, go ahead, Mr. Loggins.
I was just going to ask your permission to continue allowing Michelle Weiler to finish the last two agenda items.
Yes, please.
Okay, so the next item is item G, which is the Regulation 1005 amendment. That is basically amending the minimum topics for the perishable skills program. Those have not been updated as far as our records show since they were brought online in 2002. So 18 years later, it's probably time to do that. So we are proposing to update some of the minimum topics as well as combining tactical and interpersonal communications under one heading rather than having two separate headings or two separate options for communications, because the minimum topics for each of these prior to any amendments were already very similar and aligned with very slight differences. So our subject matter experts that we can do suggested combining them into one course. At the same time, we noticed that regulation identifies communications as a CPT requirement separate from the perishable skills program, and we'd like to bring those together so that communications is part of the perishable skills program.
Thank you for that. Committee, any questions, comments?
Just one, this is Honda again. So we're adding something, but we're not taking anything off, right?
We're not really adding anything. We are combining tactical and interpersonal communications, as well as updating some of the minimum topics to bring them in line to more current practices and more current terminology.
All right, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I have no comments further.
This is
anyone.
I agree with this too. I think it's a good move.
Okay. Anyone opposed? Anyone not agreeing with this being a good move, and we should not recommend it? Okay. I have one last question, Michelle, if you can. Can you give me one example of what we're updating?
So an example, a quick example is for firearms, perishable skills. There isn't a lot of difference in the minimum topics themselves, but the committee that we convened, subject matter experts, looked at the way that they're currently listed, and they put safety policy, orientation, moral obligations, policy and legal standards were numbered lower sequentially. And while it doesn't necessarily matter because all of the topics need to be presented in the course, most people logically, when they look at something in the way that they're listed, whatever's listed at the top takes priority. And so the group decided it was probably best to renumber those, to set those at the top to make them the priority. And then another example with the communications is combining the tactical communications and interpersonal communications, updating some of the language to use people with disabilities, identify team communication during a critical incident, specifying listening skills, discussing different communication elements, escalation versus de-escalation.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that clarification. Any other questions or comments? All right, I'm hearing no other comments or concerns from what I heard from the two commissioners. Anyone oppose us recommending this to the committee? To the commission, I should say. I apologize. Okay, thank you for that presentation.
And the last one is item H, as Mr. Loggins mentioned earlier. This is contingent on the passage of G because it does sorry, let me go back. So item H is amending regulation 1001, which is basically updating our definitions. And so this one is contingent on item G because it incorporates a definition for the continuing professional training as well as the perishable skills program, because those were not previously identified. And we had some questions in the past from new training managers wanting to know, what is this program? Where do I find the definition for it? And it's kind of buried in some of the regulations. So we wanted to put it somewhere easy to find. And then additionally, the bulk of the definitions that we've added have to do with distance learning. So we've added definitions or updated existing definitions to, again, bring it in line with current best practices and terminology based on industry standards.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions or comments from our committee? To me, it sounds like these are cleanup and just mere updates to make things better. I like it. Anyone oppose us recommending this to the commission tomorrow? Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Loggins.
Very well. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. That concludes our review of all the commission meeting agenda items.
Thank you, Mr. Loggins. Any presentations today? Hearing none.
I have.
Oh, we do. Great. Yes, thank you.
You're talking about our reports out from our organizations, right?
No, sir. I will get to that next.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jumping ahead.
No problem. Thank you with that. So now, sir, it would be correct for this. Any advisory committee member reports, please. Go ahead, Mr. Honda.
Yeah, Chief Honda, representing the California Peace Officers Association. First, I just want to apologize for my absence the last meeting. That was on the same day as our memorial service for fallen Deputy Sergeant Gutzweiler from the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office. But I do appreciate Assistant Executive Director Loggins for reading my report verbally. So I greatly appreciate that. And just real quick, the CPOA wants to thank Post for all your hard work on dealing with this online programming. So right now we're doing our advanced conference, which is formerly COPS West. We've been able to provide 18 different courses ranging from leadership to SB 1421 updates and officer wellness. Through Post, we've been able to offer 38 Post credits towards officer training and CPT. In each session so far, we've been averaging between 250 to 320 officers attending each course, which is just phenomenal. So, so we just want to thank Post for all their hard work in getting those classes certified. And then also we're getting a lot of feedback about the SLI program and how Manny, your staff has really done a lot of work with continuation of the program, but also expanding it despite all the challenges through COVID. So we just want to say thank you to Manny, you and your staff for all the work you guys are doing during this very trying year. And that's the end of my report.
Kathy from KG. Just want to mention that representing the community college faculty across the state of California, they love the webinars, I guess they're called, or I don't know what we're calling them specifically, between Post and the state chancellor's office for the community college. A lot of the community college faculty are really happy to finally to express what our system is like in the community colleges, which has been really buried and covered up and not really transparent. So many of us have attended the last two. I think there's one coming up, right? Yes, the evidence-based policing and the one for, anyway. So I just wanted to share something that even at my college district, which is Los Angeles Community College District, we're the largest community college district in the United States. Our college chancellor, all of the admin still believe that we are a Post program, even though we just teach administration of justice. So they have no clue, they have no idea. They don't understand that we don't teach learning domains in my college. We have actually courses that we teach that are standard number of hours that we have to satisfy for the California Ed Code. So this has really been a long and arduous road. Throughout the state of California, we have some colleges that are getting a lot of pushback to change their name from administration of justice to perhaps social justice or public administration because of what has happened and the stain that is on the discipline of criminal justice, which is just crazy. And again, it's all just misunderstandings, lack of transparency and all that. So we're working very hard from the educator point of view, education side, to educate our own people about it. We just passed a motion in my college. It was an anti-racism proposal that they put through. And the only discipline that they called out was administration of justice. And that's clearly a form of implicit bias right there. So it's just really a sad time. And we're really sorry that we're going through all of this. And the people, unfortunately, that don't stick up for these motions in our colleges, everybody points a finger at them as being on the opposite side. So I sat in a meeting and I had someone who teaches history tell me that all of my courses are post courses. And I said, I'm sorry, but at Pierce College, we don't have a post academy. You can go to East LA College where they have one, but we don't have one. And nobody believed me and everybody believed him. So I just, it's a very interesting time that we're all going through. So.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair, if I may add something to that, just for
Yes, please.
Informational purposes. So yeah, the Chancellor's office has put together 2 meetings so far. The first one was it was after the last commission meeting, I believe. I think it was at the beginning of September, and we presented on POST and what POST does in terms of academies, and as well as in service. We spoke for an hour or so and took questions. I think there was well over 300 people that attended. The next one was on evidence-based policing, and they had individuals from academia. One was two of them were former peace officers. The next one is, and we had a small role there just to answer technical questions, and there were no technical questions. The next one is on evidence-based training. That is next month. One of the panel members will be a post law enforcement consultant. And then the last one is in December, and it is on use of force. Again, this is all hosted by the Chancellor's office. They will have one California peace officer, at least for now. It appears that they've included the chief of police for Stockton, California in that discussion.
We really appreciate that, Manny. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I do. I just want to circle back, if I could, for post staff. If you need any assistance with the item that I discussed about the that new legislation that sets a maximum probationary period that's less than post regulations, I'll be happy to assist with that however I can. Furthermore, I also wanted to apologize for my absence at the last meeting, dealing with the local issue of the defunding of our agency. And that's, we expect to see much more of this coming down the pipe. In case you're not aware, the governor has established a separate committee to look into and review the role of school police throughout the state. There was initially a trailer bill that basically brought an end to school police throughout the state, and we were able to get that killed. And but this committee has been established, and it's made up primarily of students. I don't know how they're selected, but they're supposed to submit recommendations in writing to the governor's office in October of next year. So we're trying to be actively involved with that, along with all of our law enforcement partners, to try to bring some awareness. I think there's a lack of understanding and awareness of the critical role that school police departments play in public safety. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else?
Randy Waltz. Go ahead, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. Mr. Chair, just a quick report on the Public Safety Dispatch Advisory Council that met within the last 2 weeks, virtually a North meeting and a South meeting, very productive. I think the two things of note that are being explored at the moment are emerging technologies in law enforcement and public safety dispatch, looking at trying to get demonstrations for the live stream 911, which is having patrol officers listen to 911 calls while they're en route to specific calls that are identified locally. And then also having a demonstration on how the drone dispatch out of Chula Vista PD is affecting the 911 center in terms of coordinating those resources. And then also taking a look at contemporary issues in call taking for the basic dispatch academy, and most specifically looking at how to deal with callers in mental health crisis, and looking at other contemporary type issues so we can ensure that that curriculum is up to date. And that's all I have.
Thank you, ma'am. I like what I heard, this whole live stream to the officers of the call. That's amazing. For the officer to know what they're walking into. Good. Thank you for that.
Randy Waltz here. So I participated in a good deal of the Training Manager Symposium, the 3-day online event last week. Seemed like it was really very well attended. I know Capto really promoted it through our ranks. I saw a lot of our people in there. I just wanted to give some recognition. I'm sure Post staff is aware of this, but Elaine and her whole team did an outstanding job of putting this together. It was very well executed. Imagine putting a symposium into an online format, and they overcame a few little hurdles, and it was apparently seamless to my eyes anyway. Some very good content there, some presenters that you'll see on the screen right in front of you right now, and including one of our commissioners, and a lot of the Post staff participated in that. Some good information that came out. Also, up here in Region 1, we're sort of in between regional consultants, and I will say, when I needed some information, Andrew Mendonça jumped in and was very responsive, and is going to be helping me out with some good stuff here. So kudos to Post staff. We're doing a good job.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you.
May I jump
Yes,
in?
please, Mr. Alvarez.
I'd like to say something. I'm going to say it tomorrow as well, but I'll say it on behalf of those that put on the training symposium, because I know they're very humble and modest and they won't say anything, but all the folks in computer services and TDC that put the symposium together. For those that don't know, it was a 3-day online session. We used a commercial platform to deliver the training. I think the latest training ended at 2, but we had about 750 people that registered and took the training every day. So it was a heavy lift for them to put that together and to get it off without a technical glitch. So they did a great job, but they won't say anything. I'm sure they're humble, but thank you for those comments. I'm sure they're hearing it.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarez. Anybody else?
I have a question. We reported on our attrition statistics and performance statistics on the students' demographics from our basic courses to post over the last, I think it's been a year or more of students. And that information was funneled into Chow Chan. I was wondering when that information will come back out and we can kind of take a look at, or is that information going to come back out? And are we going to get a handle on what the report intended to communicate back out to the field?
Yes, thank you for the question. So the legislation, which was Assembly Bill 332, required that we collect data for a 6-month period on firearms and EVOC, specifically on failures and pass rates across the academy spectrum. We decided to do a 12-month collection of data as opposed to a 6-month study. And we also decided to collect data on all the different testing that happens at the academy and the failures, including not just EVOC and firearms, scenarios, the written test, all the tests. The data is collected by gender and by race. We finished the data collection in June. So we went from July 1 through June 30th. I believe we collected about 2,800 student data points, so to speak. The legislation calls for a report to be provided to the legislature, which obviously will be public, and we're going to publish it by April 1st of next year. So hopefully sometime at the beginning of the year, we will have that out. Right now, they're analyzing the data, collating it, and doing their write-up.
Thank you. Just for general information, the way it was put together, the spreadsheet and the information made it very easy to get the information back out. And Chow did a great job kind of keeping an eye on the accuracy. So when she saw conflicting stuff, she asked what I thought were very good questions. And I'm just interested to see how we are doing across the state with all that information. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may add, Director Sandoval, obviously it was all done on spreadsheets and such. I don't want to say it was a last minute thing. I mean, we were just kind of reacting to the legislation. Ideally, we don't collect a lot of that data. We're not allowed to, there's not regulation that requires that data to be sent to Post, but it's very valuable data to us. And down the road, if we decide to keep collecting that type of data, we would like to have some kind of an automated tool through EDI that we can, or some other platform that we can collect it so it's not just on spreadsheets. But that suited its purpose, and I'm glad, or we're glad, it was easy for you to provide it in that fashion. But thank you for those comments. I'm sure they're hearing that too.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarez. Anybody else? Okay. Hearing none, I want to just report quickly on the CCLEA a little bit. I know Mr. Webb spoke about this topic, but I know CCLEA is also involved in helping school police fight the fight. And I know they're helping California Coalition of School Safety Professionals with that also to hopefully put an end to this ability to defund or do away with our school police officers. With that said, there's no more, we don't have any more reports. I'd like to ask the commissioners in attendance for any of their comments, if they have any to share with us.
Chair, I have a commissioner in sight. I will ask that commissioner to give a thumbs up. If the commissioner would like to make, would the commissioner like to make, the commissioner advised they would not like to make a statement, so they won't make a statement tomorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Loggins. I'm blind on my side, unfortunately. With that said, if we can move to old business, Mr. Loggins.
Yes, there's several letters that are coming up on old business. The first one will be a nomination for Mr. Elmo Banning. His term expired in 2019. Contingent on if the commission approves the transition and restructure, his position will be approved and converted to a private presenter position. The next one is for Mr. Alex Bernard as a public member. His term expired in October of 2019. If the commission approves the restructuring of the advisory committee, that position will term out and expire. The next one is for Under Sheriff Randy Waltz on behalf of CAPTO. If it is approved by the commission, his term that expired in 2019 will be re-upped for another 3 years. The next one is for you, sir, Mr. Arten Barron from CCLEA. That's contingent on approval of the commission. If they do approve the measures as this body recommended, your position will be converted from, it'll be a conversion of one of the contemporary peace officer positions to remain with CCLEA. The next one is for Ms. Jamie Young from the Public Safety Dispatch Advisory Council. It's contingent on if the commission approves the modification to either keep a contemporary dispatcher that is vetted through the PSD council, or if the commission approves the recommendation from you to convert it from a retired dispatch position to or from a contemporary position to allow for a retiree to be there. The next letter is from a Mr. Edward Esquivel, who sought permission to be considered as a public member of the advisory committee. It will likely be a moot point if the commission restructures the advisory committee, because that position will no longer be in place. And the final one will be from Detective Kenneth Fitch, who is a current peace officer. And if the commission takes the recommendations from this body and approves that person, he will fill the remaining contemporary peace officer position. And in theory, it would make the entirety of the commission whole with a slight restructuring. And that is the end of our old business.
Thank you, Mr. Loggins, for that. Any new business, sir?
Yes, as a reminder from post staff, the nomination period is open for the Training and Excellence Awards, as well as the Bud Hawkins Awards. The termination date is at the beginning of December. As a reminder, particularly in this day and age when law enforcement is ever more challenging, this is a tremendous opportunity to recognize those folks in a training capacity that do phenomenal work, not only for their agencies, but for the respective communities they serve. The information for the entirety of the law enforcement profession is on our website, and I can actually be reached out personally if somebody wants to seek advice on how to go through the nomination period. And the last letter of new business is from Chancellor Eli Ortiz Oakley, who's the Chancellor of the California Community Colleges Chancellor's Office. And that is a nomination, again, that we've discussed earlier for bring Dr. Shinny Weber, who's a Vice Chancellor from the Chancellor's Office, onto the advisory board in that capacity. And that concludes the new business.
Thank you, Mr. Loggins. In committee, I would ask that everyone make a valiant effort to promote our awards that we have to post. I know in the past, it seems that the number of candidates that are being submitted have kind of dwindled down. I would ask that all of you make a big effort for your organizations and departments, if you're active, to please seek out nominations to bring light to this and remind people that these awards do exist. I would love to get an influx of nominations. It's always a good thing when we have a hard time selecting between good candidates and good nominees. And so against future meetings, I understand we have upcoming meetings if everything works for our committee and we're still in place. February 24th and 25th would be, or 24th for us in Pasadena, June 2nd and 3rd, obviously June 2nd for us in West Sacramento, and October 21st, West Sacramento, all well. And I hope that we don't have to do video Zoom by then. And if we don't have anything else, I'd like to adjourn our meeting.
May I add something for the next meeting in Pasadena?
Yes, Mr. Alvin.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So at the commission meeting in August, I know we didn't have an advisory. We asked for permission to change the schedule for commission, advisory, and finance, and they approved it. So we were going to make it effective February, is what we said at the last commission meeting. So what that will entail is we will kick off the morning, Wednesday morning, first thing with finance. As soon as finance is over, then the advisory committee meeting will start. So it won't be in the afternoon, it'll be in the morning on Wednesday. And then we'll kick off the commission meeting at 1 o'clock on Wednesday. They'll go the entire day, and then they'll have Thursday morning to wrap up whatever was still left off. So what that means for advisory, obviously, is it will start earlier. Some folks from the advisory and the finance committee may not be able to make it there by 8 or 9, whenever I can't remember the exact start date. So that would require a travel day on Tuesday. It would also give the opportunity for the advisory and the finance committee or the advisory folks to either spend an additional night on Wednesday night so they can see the entire commission meetings, or to depart. So it's a little bit of a change in schedule. And the reason we did that is to add time for the commission to meet, because it seems like they were rushed to do it all within a short period in one day. So this gives the ability to go to the second day And it also gives the ability for the advisory committee to stay if they want to participate with the commission. And as we've done in the past, we've tried to host a dinner for those, a voluntary dinner for those that want to attend, where we cannot discuss commission business or the agenda. Usually we did that the night before the advisory and finance meeting, if I'm not mistaken, on Tuesday nights. So we'll do that on Wednesday nights. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarez.
Stand corrected.
Before we
We
end,
did
Mr.
on
Fox,
Wednesday.
anything else?
I stand corrected. So the dinner will still always be on Wednesday nights.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarez. Again, I don't see anybody. Anyone have any last minute questions or comments? Would everybody okay? And I would say safe travels normally, but we're all in our own locations. So I'd like to adjourn this meeting. Thank you for everybody's participation.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.